We all know why we're here. God damn, man, I was waiting for this to happen. Not exactly the way that it happened, but we've been fucking starved, and I'm resorting to content that I wouldn't necessarily like to resort to, although I do still believe it is interesting. This is a lot better. 5 years in Utah for star shooting guard Donovan Mitchell. He got to the second round of the playoffs one time on a team built around him, Rudy Gobert, and a whole lot of shooters. Each year was different, but there was that one year where they totally dropped the ball. You know the year. The Terrence Mann year, that year. We heard the rumblings, we knew about the beef. I don't even know how hard that they tried to conceal that. The fact that the two stars of that team didn't like each other. I mean, it was very apparent if you just watched the games. You didn't even need to hear what was said in a post-game press conference or just little side jabs and subliminal stuff here and there, whatever reports were coming out of that locker room. It had to end. We had an idea that it was going to, and as soon as that massive Rudy Gobert trade happened, that was the first domino. Everybody had the idea that he was going to be ending up in New York, and that is the first thing we're going to talk about. A lot of people, a lot of Knicks fans are like kind of on suicide watch right now. At a glance, just the fact that you missed out on a star player that is significantly better than anybody you have on your team. I know a lot of Knicks fans didn't want to give up RJ Barrett, and even though the Knicks signed an extension for RJ Barrett, they were still apparently not opposed to letting go of him in this potential Donovan Mitchell trade. And it's really interesting that Quentin Grimes was apparently the guy that held up this deal, which Knicks fans, they that might not be something that they very much appreciate from management. And I could just take this time to just go in on the New York Knicks. They are such an easy target. True punching bag of the Eastern Conference NBA landscape. But I'm not going to do that because I really don't think they missed out on that much. The team as currently composed is already highly questionable. And that's not to say that this would have made it worse. I mean, obviously your team gets better. You add a player that is better than everybody on your team. That being said, Donovan Mitchell was not putting this team in or near championship contention, especially if you gave up RJ Barrett for him. You're pairing him with Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle as your big three. You think that's going to work? A big reason why Donovan Mitchell was able to take teams so far in the regular season shouldn't just be attributed to his own individual skills, which I think were put on better display in the playoffs than they were in the regular season, whereas Rudy Gobert was the guy holding down that defensive end, and as an anchor, so many of their regular season wins, regular season runs, and successes can be attributed to that. So playing on a Knicks team that still doesn't have much in the way of defenders or three-point marksmen, I really think you would still be middling. I mean, you might go from the 11 seed to the 8 seed. You look at the way the Eastern Conference is constructed even before this Cavs trade, we already have 6 or 7 playoff spots that are all but decided. With the Cavs now, that just makes an even more loaded Eastern Conference. Just want to get that out of the way that I don't necessarily think the Knicks are a loser in this trade. Now, when we look at the two teams that are actually involved here, it's really hard for me to diagnose if somebody won or somebody lost, because in the case of the Rudy Gobert trade, which I think is kind of similar, you can draw some comparisons here, we saw what the Timberwolves were doing. And a move that, even though how well that fit ends up being is to be determined. We have no idea because there is a high ceiling there, but also a clear floor that Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert, that might just be a disaster. I don't necessarily think there's a high chance of that, but that chance is certainly there, and if it is a disaster, well, you just gave up your entire future for that, which leaves you in a blistering hole that you literally may never get out of. You may have doomed your franchise because you gave up 5 first-round picks. Now, in this situation, the Cavs gave up 3 first-round picks, but the future of the Cavs looks a whole lot better than the future of a team like the Minnesota Timberwolves. And the reason that I say that is because your young star, prior to acquiring Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland is 22 years old. And Evan Mobley is a guy that you think is going to be a star on your team, has shown flashes of some incredibly unique skills that will make him a key piece of this team going forward. He's going into his second year in the league. And also, just the capacity for failure. Like, it's a lot slimmer than a team like the Minnesota Timberwolves. You gave up less for Donovan Mitchell than the Timberwolves gave up for Rudy Gobert. Donovan Mitchell, proven elite scorer in the NBA, guy that can put a team on his back in playoff games, but during the regular season doesn't have to do it all on offense. with another guy alongside him, Darius Garland, that can run the show himself. Now you have two guys that can create offense anytime you need it, and down the stretch of a game, teams are going to have harder time focusing in on who they want to direct the ball out of the hands of. Pick your poison. Now, the first thing that I thought of with this Cleveland Cavaliers team is we're talking about a team that's going to make a big leap now that they acquired Donovan Mitchell, giving up really none of their key pieces to get him. But how good does that really make them for next season? Are they in that contending tier with the Milwaukee Bucks and Boston Celtics? I'm just going to say no right off the bat. That is a big ask for a team that's coming off of barely missing the playoffs to jump from play-in loss to NBA championship. Let's just pump the brakes a little bit. My first thought was their lack of wing talent. You're stacked in the guards area. Obviously, with your backcourt, it's one of the best in the NBA. And in the front court, you have plenty of bigs to go around. Losing a guy like Lauri Markkanen hardly puts a dent in your depth at that area. You have two elite defenders at the 4 and the 5, and then one of the best 6 men in the league in Kevin Love to complete that rotation. But as far as wings go, Caris LeVert is more of a 2. He's probably going to be playing a lot of 3 next year. You got Isaac Okoro at your 3, and you traded Akbaji, I hope I'm saying that right, which was one of your guys that you were going to plug in next to Darius Garland as like a 3-and-D type player. Isaac Okoro is missing the three-point aspect of that. He is a great defensive player at this point. He's going to be the defensive player on this team. So I did initially worry about maybe perimeter defense and wing depth. But having that big man duo, Evan Mobley and Jared Allen, it kind of makes all that okay. This is something that will be tested throughout the year. We will have to see what kind of step Evan Mobley takes. But in theory, having guys on the perimeter like Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Caris LeVert, that aren't necessarily great defensive players, and a guy like Donovan Mitchell was definitely a human turnstile last year at points, especially in the playoffs, that deficiency can, in large part, be negated in a lot of cases if you have a Jared Allen waiting or an Evan Mobley waiting at the rim. I mean, no one's going to want to shoot over those guys at the rim, and a guy like Evan Mobley, even better, already has demonstrated a switch ability for a big man that is uncanny for someone as young as he is and as tall as he is, long as he is. Guy that played center in college and growing up can switch onto NBA point guards, and that's something that will keep him on the floor at all times. I think when you talk about a contending team, and if this team has it to win multiple playoff series, first of all, we have to see what a guy like Darius Garland can do in that scenario. He did get a little taste of that playing against other playing teams. They went 0-2, and he was pretty good, but of course, we haven't seen him in an actual series. Donovan Mitchell, we know he can deliver in that spotlight. You do need a third, tertiary creator. And whether Evan Mobley can become a reliable 15 points every night, or if Caris LeVert is going to contribute that to you via a 6 Man of the Year campaign, is yet to be determined, but surely they have the capacity to do that. Isaac Okoro, Jared Allen, not out there to dribble the ball or make any sort of plays on the offensive end. It's defense strictly for Jared Allen, catching the ball under the hoop or off a rebound, putting it back in. Isaac Okoro, got to get better in that 3-point shot and then cutting to the rim, crashing boards as well. Just wreaking havoc, being your sort of junkyard dog type player, if you will. So certainly exciting for the Cavs, and there's going to be a lot of expectations for them this year. I don't know about contending, but maybe they could be in that tier with Philly and Miami, and that's kind of second tier. I also have Atlanta with those guys because I am very high on Atlanta this year, and that Atlanta versus Cleveland discussion is very interesting. I think this probably does put Cleveland a little bit ahead, but again, we do have to see really how this fit makes sense. Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell, of course, Mitchell is going to be in a smaller role than he was in Utah. He's not going to be having the ball all game, and maybe that's something that he likes, and maybe he doesn't want to have to carry that burden in that same way that he was in Utah, or maybe he could get frustrated at times if the offense slows down, if he's not getting the ball where he wants it, when he wants it, in an offense that may be sputtering at times. We're just going to have to see. But it is also very possible that Darius Garland takes another step next year. They have a lot of the necessary components. I will say that. But I think this trade, not only does it set them up for this year, but also for numerous years into the future, where I look at it as such a huge win for Cleveland, again, bringing up Minnesota with Rudy Gobert, is in 4 years or so, 3 years, there's really no telling what the Minnesota Timberwolves look like. For Cleveland, Darius Garland and Evan Mobley entering more of their prime years. Jared Allen is still going to be young and effective at what he does. And Donovan Mitchell at 26 years old right now still has plenty of time. He's practically entering his prime years right now. So I think a big question will be, is the combination of Mitchell and Garland enough to carry a team's offense through an NBA playoffs while simultaneously doing good enough of a job on the defensive end where Jared Allen and Evan Mobley and Isaac Okoro don't have to do literally everything on that end, where they are not targets for the other team's offense to the point where it wears down their defense. And of course, Isaac Okoro, huge year for him. He has to step into that role of being a 3-and-D guy and be effective at it, or else they're probably going to have to look for another guy to fill that because they don't really have their prototypical 3-and-D guy which would fit in perfectly at that 3 position. Now, enough about the Cavs. Let's talk about the Utah Jazz for a second. And not too long, because it's not so much exciting stuff going on there. We know that they're doing like a complete rebuild right now, and they will be certainly in contention for top picks in the next several years of the NBA draft. But they get Colin Sexton in this deal, which is really interesting, given that he hasn't played in a long time. Also on a brand new contract, he's going to be probably the main offensive option there. He'll be in good shape to put up his 20, and that will probably be the amount of wins that they get. I don't know if they're going to be that bad for that long. When you have that many picks, you have the leverage to make moves fast and get your team on the uprising really quick, as long as they can identify the young players they want to build around. That's going to be when they can really start to build their team. So we're just going to have to see if guys like Colin Sexton, Okbaji, Lauri Markkanen is a keeper on that team. And, of course, Talen Horton-Tucker, Jared Vanderbilt, guys like that. Can they be role guys around what they're trying to create? Or are they just at a pit stop and will they be moved again to another team in the next year? I mean, the Cavaliers, I don't really see how these picks that they give up in this deal have very much value to them. So maybe I guess Utah lost this trade because New York Knicks picks would be a lot more valuable than Cleveland Cavaliers picks. That's kind of the way I'm looking at this right now. If they had made this deal with the New York Knicks, maybe they want RJ Barrett or they don't. I heard that they didn't want RJ Barrett necessarily because they might win too many games with him, or he just wasn't the number one guy they wanted to build around. 2 valid reasons to not take this trade. I think the Knicks, if they really wanted to get this deal done, they could have, because Obi Toppin wasn't in this rumored trade. I don't know, maybe the Jazz thought these young players from the Cavs were more enticing than those from the Knicks. They also wanted Quentin Grimes, and they weren't able to get him in the deal from New York's end, so the Jazz really felt pressured to get rid of Donovan Mitchell and really kickstart this rebuild as they have this new coach coming in. They already got Rudy out of here. They're really intent on winning as few games as possible next year. And so the pressure to get rid of Donovan Mitchell was definitely high, I felt like. You got plenty for Rudy Gobert. I wouldn't stress too much on not getting as much for Donovan Mitchell. I do not think his market value was as high anyway as a guy like Rudy Gobert for whatever reason. 3 unprotected picks is not nothing. I guess you would have wanted one of those core young guys. I mean, obviously the Cavs weren't giving up Garland or Mobley. So Jared Allen was like the most likely of that big 3 to be dealt, and wasn't. The fact that you could get this trade-off without giving up one of those 3 guys. Okbaji is the guy with the value that they lost, the highest value player they lost, and I think that's okay. As long as you can replace those minutes somehow, you have all the talent in the world around that 3 position. So, honestly, W for the Cavs. I can't wait. Full 2022-23 NBA season coverage on this channel. As soon as the season starts, we'll be talking about all of it. You better believe it. So, stay tuned.